Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cultural and Creative Glasgow Q&A as part of the University of Glasgow PG Open Day. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in and for making it to the end of today. We're really delighted to have a great panel of creative folks with us today. We're going to be talking about how interesting and exciting it is to study in Glasgow, to live here as creatives. So I'm going to introduce everyone on the panel. So firstly, my name is Dr. Kevin Leomo. My pronouns are he, him, and I work as a community engagement manager here at the College of Arts and Humanities, overseeing some of our cultural programming and supporting public engagement across the college. So first up, I've also got Katie O'Grady. So we're delighted to have Katie with us. Katie is a graduate of the curatorial practice, MLIT, that is jointly delivered between University of Glasgow and the Glasgow School of Art. And Katie now works at Civic House, one of the venues that Glasgow is super proud to have as the events and hire manager. Next up, we have Dr. Maria Sledmere. So Maria is a creative writer and lecturer in creative writing at the University of Strathclyde and is a prolific academic, artist, educator, and editor who also works on Spam Press, which is a community interest company here in Glasgow. And finally, we have Sonia Killmmann, who is a graduate from the Bachelor of Music program here at Glasgow Uni. And is now an independent composer, audiovisual artist, practitioner of experimental music, and often works with Cryptic, which is an arts organization based here in Glasgow. So welcome to all of our panelists. Great to have you. We all know each other in some regard. We maybe worked together, studied together in various ways, but we're kind of here to talk about Glasgow and the city of Glasgow. So I'm going to start off with kind of an open question to all of you. Why do you think it's great to study at Glasgow in terms of the arts and humanities? I'm going to throw it out there, and whoever wants to come in first, feel free to jump in.
Well, for me, it's kind of, I don't know, and the obvious answer is just how open Glasgow University is. And so like I'm from Belgium originally, and often people ask me like, why did you leave Brussels to go to Glasgow? And because Glasgow internationally doesn't really have that much of a reputation about having such a great scene, even though it does. But it's not like the city that people would think of to move there for culture and for all these things, And then I was like, oh well, University of Glasgow was one of the only universities that I could find that would offer someone young like me, like when I was 18, would offer me an opportunity to try out loads of different things. So for me, it was really important because I wanted to do psychology at first. And then I did psychology with music and a bit of history of art. And then turns out I enjoy psychology, but not enough to study it. So I switched to music and history of art later. And it's just like that just instantly gives you, like, first of all, a broader kind of understanding and general knowledge, but also just like as a young person gives you so much flexibility in just like being able to fully explore the things that you want to learn and find your path without having to like set yourself on something that you might not really enjoy but didn't know you didn't.
That's great, Sonia. Thanks. I've forgotten that you started off doing other subjects as well. But yeah, both in study at the uni, but like the wider city, there's so much you can explore. And if you come here to study or to research, you're not hemmed into like one specific discipline. There's so much to explore. So I wonder if Maria or Katie, you want to jump in next to talk about why it's interesting to study here.
I would actually agree with what you're saying there, where like there's so many opportunities for kind of multidisciplinary approaches to what you do. I kind of moved to Glasgow. My background's in visual art, so I went to art college in Ireland. And I wanted to study curatorial practice and kind of chose Glasgow kind of because of the city. Like to me, from Ireland, it was kind of known to me as an interesting visual arts hub. But across the city, like while there are so many great institutions you can engage with, like the Centre for Contemporary Arts, GOMA, different galleries like David Dale, Transmission, there's also such an amazing like DIY scene, which is just really heartwarming and easy to access. And like that kind of attitude in Glasgow really allows you to maybe like even expand your studies with others around the city to become very cross-disciplinary. Within my practice during my master's, I actually worked with Maria, the privilege of doing that, which was amazing, and engaged with like creative writing through her work, through exhibition making, which wasn't something I'd done before, and really opened up my eyes to like possibilities of my practice going forward. So I think it's an amazing city for that. And for also just getting to know people so easily. You can kind of attend any event and come away and make new friends.
Yeah, that's super, Katie. Thank you. And I think talking about like the DIY scene in Glasgow is something we'll definitely come back to, because I feel like we've all contributed and benefited from that. Yeah, over to Maria.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like Kevin, I am a triple graduate of Glasgow Uni. I did my undergraduate, my MLit, and my PhD, or my Doctorate of Fine Arts. So something must have kept me here for the past 13 years. What I love about Glasgow, as a bit of a country bumpkin, I grew up in rural South Ayrshire, is the scale. It's a big city. It's the most diverse city in Scotland, but it's also small enough that there's space to do, as Katie was saying, things like the DIY scene, and to sort of foster communities around things. I moved to Glasgow because of the music scene. It's world renowned for its indie music, its post-punk music, and when I was 18, that was as important to me as yeah, I guess what I wanted to study at university. And very much what I've loved about it over the years is that feeling that you don't have to just choose between different identities. You can be an academic and an artist. You can be a do-it-yourself organizer, making things happen on a shoestring, but you can also be professionally involved in various initiatives. And it is a city where there's like loads of queer community, lots of you don't feel. I felt very welcomed as a working class person coming here, and kind of there was it didn't feel like there was barriers or expectations. Like I felt very welcomed and kind of free to just explore studying. There's so many great resources. I lived in the library for a long time. And it feels like there's something to do every night, whether it's poetry readings, gigs, comedy nights, public science talks, all of these things. And I think I moved to Glasgow wanting to be a music journalist, and kind of now I feel like it made me a poet. That's the effect of it.
I love that. Thanks, Maria, so much for that. Yeah, just talking about the scale of the offer that's in Glasgow, like it's so well known for so many different areas, whether it's visual art, music. Just popped up there that Glasgow is a UNESCO city of music, and one of the UK's like top cultural and creative cities. And just from like what we heard briefly already, I think it's quite evident. Just talking about music, we all love music and are practitioners of music in various degrees, whether it's writing or performing or writing about music. And Katie already touched upon the great venues that we have here. So I want to ask each of you, what is your favorite venue in Glasgow? And you can answer that however you like, whether that's in terms of performing at, Sonia, or going to a gig at. I want to know what your favorite venue is.
I actually think recently I went to see an amazing gig at St. Luke's, which is kind of like an old church, and it was just such a beautiful, like intimate setting. Obviously being a church, it kind of has like that very like ethereal feeling to it, but it really suited the music I went to see. It was Lancome, who were absolutely amazing. But other venues as well, like I think French Street, which is run by Strangefield, I'm really interested by, and like they do like a really amazing visual arts program. I think they're one to kind of keep an eye on over the next coming years. But they also kind of have like music, DJ nights, kind of lots of different things, and it feels like a really open, accessible space that is just really exciting to watch what they do.
Super, thanks, Katie. Yeah, and St. Luke's is great, and there's so many venues around Glasgow that are like old converted churches or converted something or others, and like the history of Glasgow itself like really comes across in these venues, and we're able to attract like really great artists to a city of our size. Yeah, Sonia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, well, St. Luke's, I was also going to say, is definitely my favorite venue to watch gigs in Glasgow. It's just like the sound in there is insanely good. And like I've seen the most beautiful events there. Like there was the first ever classical concert that I saw that was really truly like a different type of classical concert was by Chamber Music Scotland, and they kind of made like a gig like setting, and it was like there was a DJ who was doing like cool but not too cheesy remixes of the songs that they were gonna play. And then, you know, there wasn't like an expectation to stay quiet during it and stuff, and people were just like standing and were at the bar. But the sound for the classical kind of music and the acoustic side of it was just like amazing. But in terms of playing, I will always say the Glad Cafe is my favorite venue to play at. I've played there like loads of times, and the staff are like incredibly accommodating. And you meet loads of fun and nice people. Like half the staff are also like musicians themselves, and they make, you know, they're like a great community of people, and you actually end up making friends there if you play there loads. So yeah, the Glad Cafe is for sure my favorite venue to play at, and also to watch gigs actually.
Thanks, Sonia. Yeah, shout out to the south side of Glasgow there with the Glad Cafe. And yeah, just another like great point in that so many of these like venues and institutions are run by people who are artists. So, you know, they're working in the bar, they're working to as promoters for the gigs, but like they're artists themselves and have their own practices. And like I feel with four of us as well, we're kind of emblematic of that too. Maria, what's your favorite venue?
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard to decide. So I'm going to give a couple from different scales. I think my favorite big venue is the Barrowland Ballroom, which is an iconic Glasgow venue. It's where everyone, you know, everyone's grannies used to go there for discos, and now it's host to, you know, really, really exciting gigs, and it just has this world-renowned reputation. I think bands love playing there. It's a really sort of intimate and intense and great place to be. In terms of smaller independent venues, the Hug and Pint, which is a basement venue, I think it started about 10 years ago, and it's where a lot of up and coming touring bands will go. So I, you know, cut my teeth doing lots and lots of gig reviews of Hug and Pint gigs. In terms of performing as a poet, well, I wanted to give a shout out to the Oran Moor, which is another converted church. And I think a lot of places in Glasgow are, you know, former warehouses or buildings that have gone through many afterlives. And the thing that's distinctive about Oran Moor is in the auditorium, there's this really beautiful Alistair Gray mural. Alistair is sort of Scotland's James Joyce. He's an artist and novelist. Some of you may have seen the recent Poor Things film adaptation. And it's Scotland's biggest piece of public art, and it's, you know, really, really gorgeous. It's 5-10 minute walk from you know, Glasgow Uni campus as well. And I've seen the poet Eileen Miles perform there. It's also I've seen some gigs there too, and the sound has this kind of, yeah, like a auditorium acoustic. And I also really like some of the smaller venues that are bookshops and coffee shops. So places like the Alchemy Experiment on Byers Road, Good Press, the bookshop in the Salt Market. It's, you know, Good Press has got some of the best book selection in Scotland. It gets really great small press distribution, and it's a real treasure trove. And they're lovely hosts. So a lot of DIY poetry stuff happens there.
Super. Thanks, Maria. And yeah, love the shout out to Oran Moor. And it reminds me of your many anecdotes of working there and interesting stories of the clientele. But yeah, there's so many great venues across Glasgow of various scales and sizes. I think I would give a shout out to the Old Hairdressers in town. Really well known for like hosting and kind of like celebrating DIY experimental music, underground scene. Always like really interesting programming taking place there. We've talked a bit about the kind of DIY scene and like having individual practices that we do on top of our studies or on top of our work. So I wonder if this would be like quite interesting thing to get into at this stage. And we're kind of all have different practices coming from visual art, from sound, from creative writing and poetry. So I would maybe want to ask you, like, what's it like kind of working in the DIY scene, and also like what's it like to collaborate in Glasgow, because there's so many amazing practitioners, researchers, artists. Yeah, I think it'd be great to talk about the idea of collaboration.
I know you go, Sonia. I can jump in here because collaboration is a big part of my practice, and it kind of links back to what we were saying earlier about the scale of Glasgow. I think very few collaborations or projects that I've done over the years have been planned. They very much come out of being in the right space, meeting people at events. And there's this really nice osmosis between what happens on campus and what happens in these kind of more DIY venues, and just what happens, frankly, in cafes and pubs. And I think there's this feeling of everyone knows someone connected to someone. So people can always set you up with someone that might have a similar practice or something worth working on. We kind of know about each other sort of from the network before you've even met maybe. And so what I love about, I guess, working in the DIY scene is the way that we can make a lot happen by kind of pooling resources. The poetry press that I run called Spam started in 2016, and it always was this kind of collaboration between the editors, who were all the time students in Glasgow, and different venues. So we used to use the Poetry Club in SWG3, which is run by the artist Jim Lambie. And then we've sort of moved around the city since. And just, if you start a project like that, you're kind of always drawing on things like local printers, local musicians. We'd put on a lot of nights where we'd have bands playing, we'd have poetry performing, we'd have film screenings. And there's a real appetite for a kind of cultural eclecticism, where you wouldn't normally think that someone in, say, an indie band would necessarily want to come to a poetry reading, but there's a lot of kind of cross flow between different forms and genres. And for example, the Events Research Program, which is a kind of collective that started in the recent years, they put on these kind of hybrid nights, and they often take place in nightclubs, but they're very much involving experimental performances. And I like that Glasgow kind of takes things to a certain edge, like it's willing to perform an experiment. It's hard to lock down one particular aesthetic or trend. I think it's always this kind of ecosystem that is innovating and challenging itself. And I think the scale makes it kind of accountable, because there's like enough room for people to grow, but it doesn't feel too small.
Super, thanks, Maria. And I love that idea of everyone is kind of connected in one way or another. Like, we are all aware of like who else is working in the city. And I think one thing, we've both been like teaching at Glasgow Uni, and now you're a lecturer at Strathclyde. But I would always say to my students, teaching happens in the classroom. We have amazing lecturers and staff, but a lot of the teaching and experience of studying at a Glasgow institution is about going out and just trying out and going to see the weird and wonderful events that take place, because you get to meet so many interesting people. You get the chance to like network and speak to them after the gig, ask them about their work and their practice, and make these connections. So Glasgow as a city is just like amazing for that. We have amazing teaching happening at the uni, but also it's so connected to like the wider like art ecosystem. Sonia, did you want to come in next?
Yeah, I think like it's funny that you ask about kind of what the collaboration is like in Glasgow, because I think outside of university, where you're kind of like, thrown together with people, but once you're like in the real world in Glasgow, it is all about the DIY scene collaborations. It is all about, as you were just saying, like meeting people at events and saying like, hey, I really enjoyed that, you organized it, cool, could I put something on, or would anyone be interested in like joining my gig? And it's like constantly now I get like people messaging me being like, oh, would you be interested in like support this, or like play sax here, or do electronics for this? And it's just like, because people know me from the DIY scene, which in Glasgow, to be honest, is pretty big already, but it still feels to me like the sound art scene specifically just feels like a family. Like everyone's just so nice and supportive to each other, and like especially through Sound Thought, which I'm a part of with Kevin. It's really lovely to be on, not on the side of playing a gig, but on the side of organizing a gig or an event, and then seeing who all comes to that, and seeing like how the people connect with each other, and how that all works, and kind of seeing that unfold and being the facilitator of that in some ways as well. um and I mean, especially because arts funding keeps getting cut and cut, and I feel like in other countries, I mean, knowing this from Belgium has loads of arts funding, and you can see it, there's arts, there's a huge scene, it's great. But I love that in Glasgow, even though we have lack of arts funding, that doesn't get the artists down. Like, I feel like it's still one of the best in Europe, even though like the government won't let us do the things we want to do. And it's just, yeah, I think the DIY family in Glasgow is really what it's all about.
Love that, Sonia. Yeah, I think there really is something about the city of Glasgow, like whether you're studying here, working here, we do kind of all look out for each other, and there is so much kind of like shared collaboration and like just like working together, and people are not afraid to do that. So great. Katie, how about you? How do you find collaboration?
I think Glasgow is like an amazing city for collaboration, and even in the sense of I've had like multiple times where I've really admired someone and like heard about them, maybe felt like slightly intimidated about reaching out or getting in touch about working on something. And every time I've ever done it, they've come back like so positively and been so enthusiastic about getting involved in a project that I'm doing. So I think there's a real support network within that too, where there's like people who are established creatives and artists and makers are really willing to kind of put in some time to support others who share similar research interests or perhaps are working on projects that are along the same lines. And that's a really nice thing to see. It's a real testament to like, again, I guess what Maria's talking about with the scale of the city. Like, it is big, so it feels open and expansive and so full of possibility, but also is like connected and very caring in that sense too. I've also had a situation where like some DIY contacts I've met have then turned into like professional contacts in Civic House where I work, where we then like engage with people about possibly delivering programs for different events that we do and stuff. So it always feeds back into itself. And even if it is just DIY, like that can eventually become something that is funded, hopefully, or becomes maybe with more professional capacity.
Thanks, Katie. And just on the mention of Civic House there, I probably should have given Civic House a shout out in terms of my favorite venues. It would be really interesting to hear a bit about your work at Civic House in terms of like your curatorial practice, because there's honestly so much like amazing programming going on in Civic House, and maybe just to hear a bit about like the history of Civic House would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So Civic House originally, so it's a post-industrial building that's been passive house retrofitted, which basically means that it's energy positive. It's a really amazing thing to have achieved. I think it's the first one in Scotland. And at the moment, it is like kind of a creative hub. So it's a co-working space, has a co-working studio upstairs. We've got a canteen that's run by the amazing Parveens. And we also kind of have like an events program, and we hire out our spaces. So we kind of try to build it on like a sustainable, resilient model where like the funding income that we generate is then fed back into running the building and then producing any sort of events that are output from it. Because of this, like, we're really lucky. We've got some amazing partnerships. I mean, Kevin's one of them, who hires the space a lot through the Thinking Culture program and Dear Green Bothy project that you work on as well. We also have like Glasgow Short Film Festival, who are amazing. That's actually on later this month if anyone's actually in Glasgow. And different things like Counterflows Festival. Alongside that, like, we are kind of work focused. So we're going to probably explore more things like Pecha Kucha talks and kind of engaging people across this kind of cross discipline of visual art, architecture, design, social practice and stuff. The history of the building is really interesting. So it originally began in the 1920s as a printing press called Civic Press, and primarily produced like left-wing publishing, papers, leaflets, flyers. I think like the first May Day presentation in Glasgow in like 1912 or like 1920 something. There's like some snippet of that I saw in the archive of the work of the building. But it's really amazing because it kind of like holds the same ideals, and a lot of the people who engage with the space are definitely connected to that very specific thing that exists in Glasgow of like left-leaning and radical action. And it's really nice to continue the history of the building and also to see like a post-industrial space be kind of reclaimed in that way. Yeah, come check it out. Yeah, the canteen's open Tuesday to Friday, so yeah, pop in for some really delicious lunch as well.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Katie. It's great hearing about the history of Civic House. We'll get back to food because, as you all know, I love food. But yeah, really great, interesting hearing about like the kind of leftist history of Civic House. So I'm going to segue into thinking about work. So I want to ask each of you, what is it like kind of finding ways of working and making money kind of alongside your studies? So kind of answering a question that has been sent in from Laura. Just want to ask each of you how you find or how you found kind of managing studies and finding kind of work in whatever form that could be during your time in Glasgow.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Thanks for asking it. I think it's really important to talk about, the material situation and how we support ourselves as students. I worked as a waitress and then sort of graduated to a restaurant supervisor for over 5 years. And I did that alongside my study at undergraduate and master's level. I've also done a lot of work as a freelancer, so freelance writing, freelance workshops, doing kind of artist-led projects in a collective that I was in called A&E. And that would involve a mix of commissions. So I think the kind of running a sort of freelance career a little bit alongside my studies also fed back into the kinds of things I was writing about at uni. And I think part of what makes it feasible is that, Glasgow is a big city and there's a lot of opportunities, but it's also, commute times are short. You can walk a lot of places. There's the subway, there's buses, there's trains, and the public transport, is quite affordable. But you can walk everywhere, and I think that is part of what sustains. I know that a lot of people will do things like working in campus jobs in the library. There's a lot of good advice hubs and career advice to support those kind of jobs. But yeah, I mean, Glasgow has a thriving hospitality industry, and I know a lot of students support themselves that way. And I did it too. And, it was great because I met so many people through this job. It was very sociable. And I was also working in a place where, lots of artists and writers and painters and theatre directors were hanging out. And so it was a good way of just talking to people, meeting people, encountering them, whilst being quite shy. It really helped bring me out of my shell, I think. So yeah, that's how I supported myself through my studies.
Great, thanks, Maria. And again, kind of going back to that idea that no matter like kind of where you are, you will be finding kind of other people in the same position, or like it turns out they're actually an artist themselves, or they have this other like really interesting facet to their career and their work. Katie or Sonia, do you want to answer this question?
I actually think like alongside when I also did my master's, I worked part-time in a gift shop, so like in retail to kind of support myself. But also there are kind of different kind of freelance-y kind of jobs, like definitely working in events and like at certain cultural like institutions and stuff. Like I know at Civic House, for instance, we like hire freelance staff to work on the bar or like to be front of house. So yeah, there's always like lots of different things to keep a look at. And yeah, I think supporting yourself like through funding applications and going for grants, like there's some great groups like Glasgow Connected Arts Network. They can be amazing for kind of like giving small grants towards smaller projects and stuff if you kind of want to engage in delivering things. It's a great city for finding your feet, but it's also a really affordable city. So you will find that like what you have will go a lot further than other places as well. And that was definitely true for me coming from Ireland, which has become insanely expensive recently.
Yeah. Yeah, just jumping in on that for the freelance stuff. So like you can definitely, but it depends on the kind of degree you're doing. But I know that for engineering degrees, you definitely can like work in the lab as well in Glasgow University and things. But for more of the artistic degrees, I did like German lessons. Like I provided German lessons or music theory lessons while I was studying. and then just like reached out to people one-on-one to kind of establish, like start planting the first seeds of my freelance career, which I was going to start after graduating. And I know of loads of people who have studied music or arts or something like that that got themselves through it through teaching, as well as bar jobs and things like that. So the freelance thing is definitely possible as well.
Great, thanks, Sonia. And that's a really good point about kind of having a portfolio career. Like working in the arts, we're so used to being able to kind of turn our hand to anything, whether it's our own practice, but also like teaching, working freelance, working part-time jobs, maybe doing arts admin. And there's always like a lot of opportunities going. For me, I think I started off working part-time at Sainsbury's as an admin assistant during my studies. And then I got into getting internships at the university. So the university also does have like its own internships, and there's sometimes kind of part-time work going. And for me, that was like a really good way into like the wider arts ecology. We have a question in the chat about basically asking where is a good resource for finding out like what's happening in terms of like artistic practice and interesting events that's happening in the city. So I feel like there'll be going to be a proliferation of answers here. So maybe if each person maybe like gives maybe their favorite or something that they find useful in terms of like finding out what's happening in Glasgow.
I think Glasgow Art Map is amazing. So that is like also just like an Instagram profile, which kind of shares openings or events that are happening each week. It's great because like, even if you feel like you've not, after catching all those things being released by the individual institutions or groups or people themselves, you'll kind of see it all in like, this is happening this Friday or something. Also have like a very nice like printed version of a map, which has like many different venues on it, which is quite a nice place to, even if you don't know if anything's on, you could kind of maybe dot around and see what's going on there.
Yeah, and I think it was said in the chat, but the Skinny is a really, good resource for Scotland-wide like events listings, as is a resident advisor. If you're into more of the music side of things, they can do regional specific, city specific. I also love Snack Mag, which is a free magazine that gets sort of distributed around different things like cafes, and it has sort of a mix of interviews and features, and I think also some listings. And then I think also there's some sort of magical thing happens when you're in Glasgow and you're on any social media platform. You just, stuff circulates, and that's usually where I think like Instagram or something is where a lot of things happen. And yeah, just also, good old fashioned gig posters. Whatever the event is, you'll probably find it plastered on a wall or a bus stop somewhere. And that's how we find out about a lot of things too.
Yeah, I think for me at the start at university, it was seeing posters actually up in the university. And then it was like in the music building, you'd find loads of stuff about gigs going on. And then like maybe in the history of art buildings, there'd be like other things about exhibitions and things. But I think now, even outside of the university, if you know kind of where hosts your gigs or your events that you will like, you can, like, for instance, if you're into like audiovisual art, you can check the Cryptic website and see what's going on there. Or if you're into sound art, you can check the Sound Thought website, or even the Glad Cafe just puts on like loads of fun gigs, or the St. Luke's website or anything, and they will have like a list of what they're hosting. And I think in that case, I mean, I don't really do that because I feel like exactly what you said, you just come upon gigs and you come upon events that you want to go to, right? So I haven't actually looked up, oh, where should I go to tonight in ages? But I understand that if you're like new to the city, definitely just going, like looking at all the different independent bits of Glasgow, you'll definitely find at least one thing where you're like, oh, great, there's a night on here. That's exactly what I want to do. Eventbrite's really good for that as well, just following people who follow each other as well.
Great, thanks. Thanks for those answers. I think like once you're tapped into what's going on here, you could easily go to an event every night of the week, no bother at all, and it would be amazing. there's just like so much going on in Glasgow around all the different venues and like organizations. So it's just, yeah, it's great to be here. One thing I wanted to segue to, Katie already mentioned a couple of programs that we have here that are based at the University of Glasgow. So we have one program called the Dear Green Bothy, which is a program of creative and cultural approaches that address the climate crisis and environmental issues. And another program that we have here is called Thinking Culture. So it's basically cultural and creative responses, events taking any format that are free and open to the public. So I think that all of you have either been involved, either as a participant, as a programmer, as a host to both Dear Green Bothy and Thinking Culture. So I want to ask each of you maybe to like speak about a project that you were involved in with either program.
Yeah, so I was involved in a program with the Dear Green Bothy that was adjacent to COP26, which was held in Glasgow in 2021. And it was a collaboration with the artist collective, A&E Collective that I mentioned, and also some academics at Rice University in Texas. And it was basically looking at the themes of low carbon pleasure. And we did a podcast series and presented our work at a workshop that was sort of a fringe event to COP26. And we were interested in kind of exploring how ideas of, low carbon futures and thinking could be based on an idea of abundance and play and rest. So it was trying to find a positive way of engaging with these things and interviewing everyone from children to artists to academics, and it was a really, really lovely project to work on, and it definitely led to further projects. And I think partly Kevin and I's subsequent collaborations kind of came out of that just contact through the Dear Green Bothy. So it's such a like rich program of events.
Yeah, and we worked on the sound walks also for COP26, so as part of Sound Thought. And what that was basically we created these kind of journeys through Glasgow's West End, where we hosted guided walks, free for anyone who wanted to sign up. And we went around, kind of like started at the uni and then went around the West End and ended up back up at the Botanics. So it took about an hour, I think, the whole thing. And each, like, there was, I think, 5 different kind of places where we would stop, and there would be like a recording by one of the Sound Thought members, like a piece of art that would create like a guided listening experience for this specific space. And it was really interesting, first of all, to hear, you know, like kind of the people who I work with and their art and their way of creating stuff like this. But also it was so amazing to meet so many people on those walks. And I think there was a couple that I didn't manage to come along to, but they were really full, right? There was so many people there. And it seemed like a really great community event. And I think, yeah, Dear Green Bothy made that possible. And I still to this day tell people about it, and people are like, oh cool, that's such a good alternative way to know Glasgow and stuff. So yeah, that was really, really fun to work on and to meet new people.
Yeah, and then I think Kevin, you've hosted some wonderful events at Civic House, like Somnolent Cartographies, which was like a workshop led with Maria, kind of exploring sleep and like eco thoughts and ideas of rest. I know everyone who attended it like absolutely adored it, and yeah, everyone had a really great time. We could like hear throughout the building everybody like singing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" at one point, which was amazing. And also, I know that you guys are looking to like kind of present the learnings from that, hopefully in July. So yeah, there should be like a really interesting kind of learning event coming from that too.
Great, thanks all. Yeah, I think just picking up on that, I think all of our kind of creative practices or like curatorial practice has a deep interest in like ecology and environment, and I think Glasgow is like an amazing place for like pursuing that interest in terms of like wider ecology, whether it's sonic ecologies or anything. So I think that's like another like key, I think, aspect of like being in Glasgow, whether it's like the Dear Green Bothy or there's so many other programs and like organizations that are exploring wider ecological issues like Creative Carbon Scotland, which is a network which kind of supports arts organizations and artists like in addressing climate crisis and how we can like work through sustainability. So I think that's like another really interesting aspect of Glasgow. So speaking of sustainability, I wanted to pivot back to food. We could talk about this for a long time. So I'm vegan. Other people have varying diets and interest in food as well. But I want to throw this out to you because Glasgow has such an amazing food scene, and it's also such a multicultural city. So you can find many different cuisines from around the world in Glasgow. So I want to ask each of you to like name a favorite food spot, and feel free to get into as much detail as you like.
So my first thought here, as a shamefully ex-vegan, but it's still my favorite spot, is Sweetie Vegan Kitchen. It's just like I just love it so much. Like everything on the menu, everyone says this. First of all, I'm not the only one saying this. Everyone says this. Everything on the menu is amazing. The staff are amazing. There's like I don't know his name, but there's a waiter who can remember your order no matter how many people you are at the table. He will remember the order, not write anything down, and then just come perfectly say it back to everyone, come with the order and everything. And it's like it's just he is amazing, and the whole establishment as well is just so good. And they won, I think, best noodle restaurant of the year, I think for the second time or third time in a row. I'm not sure, but yeah, and they're not even a noodle restaurant only. They do loads of stuff. My favorite dish there is the curry laksa. It's just one of the best things I've ever eaten. It's like I don't know if you guys know the off menu with James Acaster and James and Ed Gamble, but on my dream menu, that laksa is on there. So definitely would recommend them, and I'm sure other people have other food places to talk about, so I won't say my second best just yet. Yeah.
I'm literally starving now, Sonia. Okay, Katie or Maria, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I really like the Hanoi Bike Shop, which is a Vietnamese place in in the West End. So again, very close to campus. I love the food because it's just like nice, spicy, comforting, again, noodle related. And it's such a nice place to basically go with a friend to have a catch up and have a little cocktail as well if you want to. And you can sit outside. It has a lovely kind of like veranda, and it's down this lane that also has vintage shops and things like that. So it's a really special place to go. And also shout out to Shawarma King, who do the best falafel wraps. And that is handily located next to a lot of gig venues and Good Press, where we do a lot of poetry.
I'm going to give a shout out to Gomo Kimchi, which is kind of more like, it's a very small shop. So you kind of go in, you can just buy like a jar of kimchi, but equally you can get kind of like pancakes with kimchi on it. And it's just really amazing. It's made by this really nice guy called Eddie, from like a traditional recipe passed down from his Korean grandmother. And he's just like the nicest guy. He really approaches it with like ideas of like preservation of heritage as well as like what he's doing. And yeah, it's just so tasty and so good on like cheesy toast. Sorry for the vegans, but yeah, it's amazing. I'm sure vegan cheese would be amazing too. But yeah.
Great, thanks so much. I think it's so interesting. There's so many like good food places, and the idea of like food cultures and food history is so prevalent as well as the idea of like mixing and like hybridizing like fusion food. I think there's so many great like kind of places to do that. So I'm going to give I would have said Sweetie as well, but I'm going to give a shout out to Parveen's canteen that Katie mentioned already at Civic House. So Parveen's is kind of like plant-based Pakistani food, and it's just like so fresh and so amazing. And I love just going to Civic House, grabbing a bowl and like sitting at the communal tables and just like taking some time off working or like meeting with friends and catching up there. And yeah, I think that's my favorite. So we could talk about food for a long time, but we should probably answer some of the questions that people have been sending in. So we've got a few like really interesting ones here. So we have actually a writer Butterfly Moon 87, and they're asking about recommendations for amazing literary venues and also just like places to meet like-minded friends. So I'm going to look to Maria to begin with for this one.
Yeah, it's a lovely question. I suppose it depends what you're looking for, what kind of writing you do. I can speak mostly to poetry, but also to wider, I guess, literary culture. There are so many independent bookshops in Glasgow, from Category Is in the South Side, which is a queer-led and queer bookshop. And as I mentioned, Good Press, Mount Florida Books as well. Lots of places that run a kind of regular program of events, and they're also kind of curated to have lots of international books. Burning House is another one, Burning House Books. There are some regular nights. So there's one that has been running in an Irish bar in the South Side called Shrill once a month. And that's a kind of almost like a variety night where it can be like fiction, poetry, comedy, singing, music, very experimental, very unpredictable, and always fun to witness. There are lots of open mics. So some of the venues I mentioned before, like the Alchemy Experiment, often have open mics. Lots of the pubs have open mics. Same goes for comedy. I met a lot of my friends in the writing scene through a mix of student societies. I was in the Creative Writing Society as an undergrad, but mostly just from being involved in making my own zines and going to, the Glasgow Zine Festival happens every year, and it comes out of the Glasgow Zine Library, which is an amazing place because it's a zine library, and you can go there and they have workshops and lots of zines to read. There's lots of public libraries as well. So the Mitchell is this really gorgeous, huge public library with the most psychedelic carpets you can imagine from the 1970s. And yeah, I would recommend going to things like open mics, but also just keeping an eye on free workshops or very cheap workshops that happen. Sometimes they're sort of advertised, as Sonia was saying, through things like Eventbrite. And they can be, I've been to things that are integrated with like supper clubs and stuff where you kind of, I don't know, you pay a little bit of money and you go to get like a nice freshly cooked dinner, and then just like a book club or a sort of poetry writing group or something like that. And yeah, lots of those kind of things are happening across the city for writers of all levels, I would say. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Maria. I'm going to ask a kind of similar question each to Sonia and Katie. So maybe a kind of similar, like for Sonia, where's your favorite place to like go and buy records or like peruse music? And then for Katie, maybe the similar around like visual art. Like where do you go? What's your like go-to places for like just like finding interesting stuff to buy or to kind of just like view or listen to?
There's loads of fun record shops around Glasgow, actually. It's funny because I remember the place better than the name of the record shops, but the first one that I can definitely recommend is the Oxfam one on Byres Road. It's got cassette CDs, records, and it's like, the stuff you get there is pretty cheap, and there's some really, really good finds that you can get. Then if you want to get either new records or more niche records, perhaps, and rather than less based on luck, but more on knowing that this place will have niche records, is Mono. So that's near, like in Merchant City in town, pretty near the Barrowlands, and you can get, first of all, amazing vegan food there, but also shop some great records. And in terms, I was going to jump in from Maria as well, in terms of open mics, I've made loads of friends from open mics, and there's one really good one if you're into just poetry, but also music and acoustic stuff and just experimental stuff, at Duke's on a Tuesday night from 9 to midnight. It's technically like an acoustic open mic, like my friends Julian and Alice run it, but people get up there and the craziest things happen. Like it's just a free-for-all. So I would definitely check that out as well. And yeah, in terms of finding music to listen to, either at gigs or in record shops, there's an abundance in Glasgow. I think I could talk about that for another 10 minutes if we had time.
Sweet. Thank you, Sonia. How about you, Katie?
Yeah, so as far as like kind of attending visual art programs or galleries, like I do think like Glasgow Art Map as a resource is amazing, because while it will showcase maybe some things happening in bigger institutions like the Centre for Contemporary Arts or somewhere like French Street that's run by Strangefield that I mentioned earlier, it'll also kind of show like a lot of people like just put on an exhibition in their living room and stuff like that. So there's lots of different interesting ways of kind of connecting to things. I think definitely French Street is one that I find really, really interesting. But like to think about a place to go to maybe purchase artworks or like unusual objects, I think the Barras, which is in the like where the Barrowlands is located, is just absolutely like not to be missed if you ever visit Glasgow. It's just like this amazing kind of open and like closed off market where you can literally buy anything. And there's so many different levels. There's kind of contemporary like illustrators, artists, makers that have their own shops installed alongside like some really amazing antiques and just yeah, really, really crazy cool objects. But yeah.
It also reminds me of when you host events at Civic House, think of like Civic Harvest or these other events where you invite like artists into the space to like sell their wares and also kind of do like activities. That's another like great program at Civic House. I want to take another question from the audience. So a question around, are there any discounts for like attending museums or cultural venues in the city, or like discounts specifically for uni students?
I mean, museums are free, which is great. I think a lot of people from overseas don't know that, but it's like one of the things that I really love about Glasgow is I live like next to a Calvin Grove Art Gallery, and I just walk in on like a random day just if I want to see some art. And it's really lovely to just walk around in, and it's quite relaxing as well. And you can tell that like, yeah, it reaches the community much better. There's free concerts there as well, like organ recitals, I think on Sundays or on Saturdays. So yeah, in terms of museums, you know, there's no discounts needed. It's free. But other than that, I'm pretty sure a lot of stuff will always have a student discount or a or kind of like concessions. Like concessions is often unspecified. It just basically means if you can't afford to pay the full price, play concessions. And a lot of places like Counterflow Festival that was mentioned earlier will do like a kind of tier as well, which means that it's either pay what you can, or the first tier, which will be maybe £10, and the second tier, which will be 15. So you know, it's all based on this kind of, I mean, the Glasgow art scene, a lot of it is based on like an honesty kind of thing. So they count on the fact that if you are able to pay the full price, that you will, but if you aren't, then no one is here to tell you to pay more. You know, no one will be turned away for lack of funds and things. So a lot of kind of organizations have that kind of motto, which I think is really good.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Sonia. This idea of kind of having like, I guess like social ticketing, and like just like so many of the DIY scene events have this in place where you're not discouraged from attending. You're encouraged to attend even if you can't afford like normal ticket prices. And I think it's a great practice, and it's really common among events here in Glasgow. We're kind of getting towards the end of the session here, which is a shame. But one interesting fact, you know, Katie already mentioned the idea of like care, and how there's a lot of care put into like the events that happen, into people's work, into collaboration, and Glasgow was noted as the friendliest and second most affordable city in the world in Time Out magazine. And I think hopefully from today's discussion, you'll have seen like the range of like amazing creative practice and events and like cultural offerings that Glasgow has. But also just that everyone is super friendly and like open to chat, open to collaborate, open to, you know, work on a new project with one another. So kind of to close off, I want to ask one final question. We've talked about a lot of like really interesting festivals and programs, but I'm just going to ask, what is your favorite program that is kind of run here in Glasgow? And I want you to answer, but not name one that you're involved with. which I know will be difficult because you're all involved in loads of really cool things. So what's like your favorite program or festival that happens in Glasgow? It's a tough one. You can see the cogs going.
I guess I'll just shout out to Glasgow Film Festival because it's happening right now. And I've never had a year where I've had time to go to everything that they do, but I think one thing we haven't talked about a lot is the cinema and film culture. We did mention the short film festival, but yeah, it's just such an eclectic program, and it kind of operates between Glasgow Film Theatre, which is our independent cinema, and like a Cineworld, and it's just a really exciting program. So that, and I think for me, because I don't make film, it's just it feels like pleasure and intellectually stimulating to go to the cinema. So
I think for me it would be a Counterflows Festival, even though that's not on this year, I don't think, but it is always like a really, really cool experience to be there, and like you always see like the most amazing people perform and also like have talks and things like this. But in terms of if you want to go to somewhere similar this year, I guess I mean, there's Tectonics Festival as well, which is always fun. It's slightly different. It's more focused on classical music, but it's definitely a place to meet, like to see loads of kind of new stuff and interesting stuff. And I want to shout out to the Sound Lab as well, who do loads of free workshops and offer like music lessons and things like this. They don't do a festival, but they're involved in loads of events, and I think keeping an eye out for them would be good.
I think from Glasgow's kind of art scene, like Glasgow International is always a really exciting thing to happen, which is like a very world-renowned art biennial that happens every 2 years, every 2 or 4 years, actually, I'm not sure, I should know that. But it's amazing because it's across like the whole city and has like its own kind of core program, open program, but also like a lot of like kind of fringe events and people that maybe weren't included, that like didn't get through, that then also do their own shows and exhibitions. So there's just like so much to see throughout the city for that whole month of June. Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. Another one I might mention as well is like Celtic Connections, and maybe like similarly to what Maria is mentioning about like your kind of adoration towards film. Like I'm not a musician, but like I absolutely love that festival, and like kind of the opportunity to see like music from so many different cultures as well is just really amazing. I saw a fantastic gig at Tramway, I think last year, by VFR Couture, and it was just so beautiful. But yeah, there's loads of amazing festivals in Glasgow. I think you could list them for days.
Super, thanks so much, Katie. Yeah, I think if you come here to study, you will not be hard pressed to find a festival happening at some point in the year, whether it's film, music, writing. There's just like so much going on. So I think that's a good time to end. So thanks so much to everyone, to our audience for viewing in. Thanks so much to Max for helping us out behind the scenes and making this so seamless and smooth. And a huge thank you to our guests today. So to Katie, to Sonia, and Maria. I think all of us are quite eminently findable on social media and online. So if you want to find out more about our work, our practice, our collaborations, our upcoming events, you can check it out online and look us up. And also feel free to get in touch if you want to propose your own project or new collaboration. But thanks so much for everyone for tuning in today. And we hope to maybe welcome you to Glasgow one day, and you'll catch us in one of these great venues. Thanks, everyone.